It's okay?
Yeah.
Cool. I'm excited. Good afternoon, everyone. Really, thank you for joining me here, and thank you for joining this weekend in general. I'm really excited and honored to be here, and I want to also extend a huge thank you to MIF for the opportunity and for the amazing work you do. So I'll start with presenting myself for a sec. I'm Adi Cohen, an Israeli journalist. For the past year or so, I work as the economic correspondent of i24 News TV channel. Previously, I was working, writing for a couple of years for The Marker, if you know it, a financial newspaper in Israel, part of Haaretz group, for those here familiar with the Israeli media for any reason. And I'm here to talk with you today about the day that really changed our lives entirely, the life of every single Israeli, perhaps every single Jew across the globe, referring obviously to October 7th, 2023, and its implications on both on our country and on our community. And for the past 3 weeks, since I was given this opportunity to bring the Israeli voice and consciousness all the way to these really beautiful woods of Norway, I was occupied with the question how October 7th attack has changed me personally, how it affected me personally. Because considerably, to be sincere, to me, life pretty much, like most Israelis, goes on, right? Luckily enough, I wasn't there physically on October 7th during the attack, neither my family or my close group of friends. I still have the work that I love, which is also not taken for granted after almost a year and a half of an ongoing war, which you can imagine how many economic implications it also has. And I'm considerably well and healthy, yet somehow, for a year and 5 months now to be precise, nothing really feels the same. And so while I was struggling to find, to put my finger on the correct answer, so I decided to conduct a little research before coming here among numerous Israelis across ages and genders from throughout the country to give you the fullest answer possible to what it really means, or more precisely, feels to be an Israeli after October 7th. So I'd like to start with a short presentation of this. And I'm saying in advance, I'm sorry for anything graphic during the presentation. I really tried not to be too graphic, but our reality is quite graphic these days. How do I do play here? So to be an Israeli after October 7th is jumping with panic for every loud scooter passing on the street, thinking it's a start of a rocket alert. This is the sound of it, urging you to run for a shelter. It's knowing at least one person who was killed on October 7th or during the ongoing war that is happening ever since. It's feeling of guilt for joy you experience while 59 of our hostages are still held captive in Gaza. It's sitting at a bar with friends, drinking and laughing, being constantly alert for the possibility of someone starting to shoot around. This is a month and a half ago in the middle of Tel Aviv. It's mistaking little clouds on the skies for Iron Dome interceptions. It's constant nightmares. It's the urge to fill your life to the fullest because tomorrow might be your last. It's eating and shopping binges. It's saving money because the future has never seemed so fragile and unclear. To be an Israeli after October 7th is being on the dance floor, having the time of your life, and not being able, not even for one moment, to swipe off the images of over 400 beautiful young souls who were raped and butchered while celebrating life and love on the dance floor. It's protesting every single week for the return of our hostages. It's the feeling of fear for friends and family members who are currently in the battlefield for over 500 days in a row. It's the feeling of betrayal and isolation from Western societies across the globe who turn a blind eye to our suffering since October 7th. It's crying with excitement for the return of every single hostage that's coming back to their beloved ones, even if we don't know them personally. And it's crying with devastation for every hostage coming back to burial. This is the Bivas family memorial, was a few weeks back. And this list, my friends, can go on and on and on and on, because perhaps more than anything to us Israelis, October 7th trauma is still present, is still happening, still bubbling in our veins day after day, hour after an hour. And to even try to deliver the extent of this collective trauma we are talking about before moving forward to discuss its implications on our country and our people, I would like to share with you for a couple of minutes my personal experience as an Israeli who wasn't there physically in October 7th attack, and I'll try to do it in the least graphic way. So imagine your typical Sunday morning, right? The equivalent to our Saturday. Early morning, 6:29 a.m. to be precise. Most of you are probably still in bed, either sleeping peacefully or rolling around with a hangover, perhaps even still partying, like many of us did during this day. Suddenly a loud rocket alarm goes on, like the one you just heard a few minutes ago. A sound that unfortunately every single Israeli is familiar with for years. It's not new to us. For quite long minutes, I'd say the country was in a state of shock and confusion, far from the understanding of what's really happening right now. The alarm won't go off for quite long minutes, leaving us all hiding in the shelters in our pajamas, listening to the loud bombing sounds above our heads, hoping it's the sound of Iron Dome interceptions rather than actual successful exploding missiles. Back then, during October 7th, I was a health correspondent at the newspaper I worked for. So the second thing I did during this morning, after checking in with my family that they were all right, was checking the work WhatsApp group, our group of journalists. I think this is the first time during this morning where the broader picture started to become clearer, but also the confusion and the stress started to become bigger, much, much bigger. It started with the growing reports of extensive amounts of rockets fired simultaneously throughout the country, and escalated rather quickly to reports. Back then it was growing suspicions of a couple of terrorists who infiltrated Israel in order to conduct acts of terror. At this point, and for quite long hours, in fact, no one dared to imagine that we are actually facing the invasion of over 5,000 Hamas and Islamic Jihad terrorists who stormed into Israel, including also Gazan civilians, who infiltrated Israel by land, air, and the sea. About half an hour later, a new stream of messages coming in the WhatsApp group, this time of a completely different nature. Some of the messages I will probably carry with me to the rest of my life, and I guess most of us will. So just so you understand the chaos of this day. So as the army and the police were slow to function during October 7th attack, to say the least, due to the severe attack both on our intelligence and communication systems, so the media during this day became quite a central force and an address to many individuals trapped in the horrors of Hamas to call for rescue and for links to security forces to come to help them. One after another, this stream of messages coming into the WhatsApp group of journalists, crying for help, for links to security forces, of those hiding either in towns bordering with Gaza or in what we later discovered as the Nova Music Festival. One message I particularly remember was so blunt and direct, yet so unimaginable, was forwarded from a 7-year-old kid. He was hiding in a closet with his little sister in their home in Kfar Aza. Both of the parents shot dead in the room next to them, and they were calling for rescue. Only later we discovered those 2 kids luckily survived, but the forces never arrived, not for long 12 hours. Now, shortly after, or even during this time, both my boyfriend back then, my older brother, and my 63-year-old father were called on duty. They had less than an hour to wear the army uniforms, to prepare a backpack for God knows how long, and to go and to hurry to the military base. And while organizing the backpacks, the TV was running in the background, and there it was, the most surreal and chaotic newscast you can probably imagine. Let me take you there for a second. Imagine Saturday morning, live TV, suddenly a call from a lady living in Kfar Aza, a kibbutz, a little town next to the border of Gaza. She's calling the news anchor, and there on live TV, she's talking to him in whispers and telling him that at this very moment, while she's on live TV, there are terrorists in her house, and she's hiding, asking him, begging him, in fact, to call for security forces to come, or whoever is currently hearing her on TV. A few minutes later, another call coming in, this time a girl 23 years old, crying for help as she sees a picture of her dad. This is Oad Ben Ami, released hostage. She sees a picture of her dad walking in his pajama, barefoot, in the streets of Gaza, shared by Arab social media accounts. And she also cried for help and even just for the understanding of what's currently happening. This is just to convey a little bit the extent of the confusion of this day. Eventually, it took us days to really understand the measures of this attack, where over 1,200 Israelis were brutally murdered, 885 of whom civilians, 53 under the age of 18, 251 were kidnapped, among them women, children, and elderly people, and thousands others were wounded physically and mentally, and perhaps the entire state was wounded mentally, but we will get there soon. And so almost every Israeli have his story and his trauma of October 7th, a trauma that for, I think, the majority of us, as mentioned, is still getting written, still being digested, still not ending. And so when we speak about the implications of October 7th on our country and our community, we essentially speak on the mental and social realms primarily. The unbelievable scale of the attack, the surprise, the mass civilian casualties, the kidnapping from people's beds or from the dance floor where people are celebrating love, created this, I would say, deep emotional scars across the nation, a quite particular collective grief, and among with the fact that for a year and a half now, we are living in a constant state of alertness and fear as the war is still going on and even expanding and escalating to the north in Lebanon, to Yemen, to Iran. I think it's reasonable to say that Israel for a year and a half now almost living the biggest mental health crisis since its establishment. And actually, in fact, wait, I think I passed one. A governmental report recently highlighted the fact that over 500,000 Israelis are currently experiencing severe PTSD and depression symptoms, and over 3 million people, a third of Israel population, are at high risk of experiencing such symptoms either in the near or far future. As to our health authorities, accordingly, we see a rise of almost 20% in the last quarter of 2024 in the use of antidepressants in Israel, and that alongside the continuing growth of addictions, both to alcohol and drugs, especially among Israeli youth. There was a... Right. Now, I'm going back a little bit, and when we talk about the trauma of October 7th, I think the extent of it is not even in the unbearable numbers that we see on the board, but perhaps in the brutality that stands behind them. A brutality of a kind that cracks your belief in humankind and in humanity, and perhaps the kind that your mind can't really accept or get, maybe until you see it with your own eyes. And so, after a week of moving from one hospital to another as a health correspondent, interviewing survivors and staff, I went further south to two of the bloodiest destinations of October 7th, Kibbutz Be'eri and Kfar Aza, two towns near the border with Gaza. And the visit in those two towns was part of a piece I was working on, profiling the work of Zaka. Zaka is a unit of volunteers who work in places of disasters as such, in order to honor the dead by bringing, and sorry for being graphic, every human piece to a full Jewish burial. So I was there joining them for a day of work, absorbing and recording the stories of horrors they witnessed and encountered while collecting bodies and human parts following the massacre. I think for months later, and for some extent until this very day, the views and smells of this visit stayed really marked ever so deeply on my soul. I will try not to be graphic, but it's the images of walls and floors covered with the sticky blood of whole families that were murdered on this day. It's the images of houses and cars that burnt entirely. It's the holes of gunshots and RPGs that marked every piece of concrete around us. And it's really the images of this brutality that the mind really refuses to get. And so it takes me back. Right, this is the one that I looked for. Sorry. So when we speak about the mental health crisis in Israel and the social implications of it, there are few factors that stands behind those statistics. First is the exposure to the horrors of October 7th. We all experience it through either WhatsApp, Telegram. We all looked for people we know that we didn't know if they were there or not. People were looking for relatives and friends to check if they were at the party, if they are kidnapped, if they are dead or alive. It's continuing through this constant state of alertness that I mentioned, and then running all the way to the fact, to the ways in which our perceptions of ourselves and of the world and of our country has changed after the attack. And therefore, perhaps, I think one of the deepest cracks that were created post the attack and never healed really ever since is in our sense of security. Traditionally, Israelis have the expectations that the IDF can protect us, defending us from all attacks at all times due to our really the strength of our both intelligence and operational forces. And therefore, the scale and the surprise of the attack, combined with the tremendous failure of our forces to respond in time, has created a deep crisis among Israelis, and I would say it's also a psychological crisis, referring to the failure of your protective systems, which have quite deep meanings to all of us. And this crisis has two main characteristics, in my views. The first one is a growing and deep distrust, even confident crisis in the Israeli government post-October 7th by the majority of the Israeli public. A crisis which is based on accusation of inefficiency, lack of preparedness, the failure to heed warnings about the escalating violence in Gaza prior to the attack, and also the ongoing failure of our leaders, primarily Bibi Netanyahu, to take accountability and resign post the attack. This is the internal aspect of it. And then the second bit is the ongoing collective decrease, as mentioned, in our sense of security, with many citizens living in a constant state of alertness and fear. In fact, recent report published in recent months by the Israeli Institute for Democracy says that 2/3 of Israelis still experience a decline in the sense of personal security post the attack until this very day. And I think that these points rely not only on the failure of our security forces and its implications on our perceptions, but also on the nature of the attack, both the brutality and the singularity of the attack being the violence directed at people while they are in their beds, in their home, in the allegedly most protected, private place, perhaps even sacred place. And I think this singularity is quite unique to this attack, and it has numerous psychological implications. And I approached this point in an article that I made about a month ago, where I portrayed this point through the struggle of many survivors of the attack to return to their homes, even if those are relatively okay or even left entirely undamaged. And that shows, because eventually a home is much more of the physical aspect of it, right? It's linked with also with memories, with sense of protection, of privacy, and the invasion of this thing can cause, as you can imagine, quite severe implications. And in order to convey this point, I want to share with you a bit of this article.
דמות עצמה פה בבית שלי, אחרי שירו בנדב, ואחרי שירו בים, ואותנו חטפו, הם הצטלמו פה בסלון, יושבים לי על ההפסקות. כן, יש תמונות קשות שלהם, הם יושבים פה, הם הגיעו לפני כוחותינו לביתי. הם יושבים, לא ניכר מבט מבוער על פניהם, לקחו פומלה, אחד מהם פומלה מהפומלת שלנו, פה יושב עם פומלה בסלון, נשקים ארוכים מפוזרים בכל מקום.
הבית אצלו, השאיר לנו פה משקעים כבדים. כל בית שני פה, זה כמו מצבה מבחינתי. כל בית שני, פה אופיר, פה שחר, פה זה, כל אחד חברים שלי, שהם כבר לא איתנו. כמו בעיניי, זה כמו בית קברות. אני לא מסוגל לחיות ככה, להמשיך את החיים שלי.
אני כמו בשכונה שפה היא על הגדר, רצחו כאן, רצחו אצלי בבית, רצחו מכל צדדינו, וכל בית קרה פה כמעט משהו נורא. חיינו פה על הגבול. אני לא יודעת אם אני יכולה שוב. לא יודעת.
So the guy you just saw is Doron Admoni, a citizen of Kfar Aza, husband to Michal and father to Guy. Both were shot dead during the attack of October 7th in their home while he was in the US on a visit to another son, experiencing the horrors and the loss of his own family through WhatsApp on this day. And she is Chen Almog Goldstein. She's a released hostage. She returned in the last deal in November 2024. She was kidnapped with 3 of her kids on October 7th, minutes after her husband Nadav and her daughter Yam were shot dead in front of them. So to do a little recap, when we speak about the implications of October 7th on Israel and the Israelis, we essentially discuss first the ongoing mental health crisis in our society, an everlasting decrease in our sense of security, and as said, cracks in our perceptions of the world, our world, the external world to us, and through those cracks passes also the deep and growing polarization in Israeli society post-October 7th. Generally speaking, to many Israelis, including myself, one of the things Israel is defined by the most is by its quite dense and varied contradictions. Contradictions of left and right, of Orthodox and liberals, of deep divisions, political divisions, alongside with a strong sense of belonging and of togetherness. And like many other things, these contradictions too have been intensified in the past year and a half following the attack and throughout the ongoing Israel-Gaza war. This referring also to the growing gaps in our political views, referring, for example, to the accountability, the governmental accountability to the attack, but primarily to the ways in which Israel should or should not act in order to regain security in the region and moreover to bring our hostages back. And in that light, naturally, right-wing parties advocate for a stronger approach towards Palestinians and Hamas, while in the meanwhile, the left and centrist parties advocate for a greater emphasis on diplomacy and on a broader answer to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Anyhow, seemingly following the attack, Israel's political discourse became even more focused on national security than ever before, quite naturally, I suppose, on military preparedness, on security strategies, and the sentiment in the Israeli public became much more militarized. And within this shift, there is also an interesting shift, and a sad shift in my view, in the lefty liberal public of Israel. While the brutal nature of the attack has actually influenced quite dominantly, I said, affected how Israelis and perhaps especially those in the left liberal public experience and view the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and the prospects for peace and the possibilities for peaceful coexistence. Seemingly, following the attack, many of us too suddenly expressed greater support for a hardline approach towards security, emphasizing the importance of the elimination of Hamas, even at the cost of escalation of the conflict. And that's, I assure you, not due to a will of revenge, but rather perhaps a better understanding of our enemy and who we are currently confronting. But on a deeper level, and I think that the shock of the attack has also led many of the Israeli public to a growing skepticism about the feasibility of the two-state solution or any other solution that consists this peaceful coexistence. As to a recent report, you can barely see it, but in a recent report, a poll conducted by the INSS institution in Tel Aviv University, we see, sadly to me, that only 34% of Israelis still believe in the two-state solutions. And that's due for the growing understanding from the aftermath of the attack that what we are facing, it's actually not a response to the Israeli occupation or to Israel's acts, but perhaps it's about radicalism, about religion, about an inherited denial of our rights to exist as a Jewish and democratic state. Having said that, we shall always remember, and that's the optimistic bit that I want you to take from this talk, through cracks eventually comes light, right? And these polls also show a majority of Israelis who support the end of the war and the conducting of diplomatic agreements. And that to me highlights the Israelis' will to end the bloody war, yet the readiness to act by all means in order to really assure that this time it will really be never again. And that's due to the understanding that the people that we are bordering with, the terror organization that we are bordering with, to them, the next October 7th is just a matter of time. And in order to deliver this point, I want to show you a testimony by Chen Almog Goldstein, you just saw a second ago, the message that she received from her guards while being in captivity in Gaza.
כשהיינו שם בעזה, הם אמרו לי, אל תחזרי, החוליה שמרה עלינו, אל תחזרי לכפר עזה, we love you, you're a good family, כן, we love you, לכי לעכו, לכי לתל אביב, אנחנו נחזור. ייקח לנו 3-4 שנים, אנחנו נשתקם, אנחנו נחזור. כמה באנו ביום שבת? 3,000? נבוא 20,000, נבוא 40,000. הם היו מאוד נחושים.
את מאמינה להם?
כן.
מאמינה שזה...
הם היו מאוד נחושים, כן. זו תוכנית. הייתה לקחת מטוס מחצרים, ללחות בירושלים, התוכנית שהם סיפרו לנו עליה. חלק מהתוכנית של יום שבת, שלא מאושה בסוף, זה לקחת המטוס מחצרים, ללחות בירושלים ולהתפלל באל-אקצא.
Right. I hope it wasn't too fast with the subtitles. So, I think above all these gaps and contradictions I mentioned, stands also our greatest strength in Israel. And it's also something that you should know about us. The strong sense of unity, of shared destiny, of connection to one another, which over the years have become probably a crucial part of our social identity, perhaps especially in times of crisis and as such. And this sense exists amid all this deep and growing polarization among us, especially the political polarization, and perhaps it acting as during the past year and a half almost as a kind of protective shield to the Israeli community, to our somewhat broken spirit that for over 500 days in a row still waiting for a point of normality where our healing journey could finally start. And that won't happen until October 7th is actually behind us. And that essentially means also the return of our 59 hostages who are still held captive in Gaza. And for that purpose, we need every one of your voices. Thank you, guys. I'm here for any question, or if you want to do it as an open discussion. If any of you have any questions.